This is the Retold Files. We retell and condense classic detective stories for those moments when you want a complete story without the commitment of a long read. One that even Scotland Yard couldn't decipher. A simple cardboard box, a few knots of twine, and a package filled with salt. Holmes sees something far more tragic than a mere crime. In choosing a few typical cases which illustrate the remarkable mental qualities of my friend Sherlock Holmes, I have endeavored to select those which presented the minimum of sensationalism, while still affording a fair field for his powers. It is, however, impossible to separate crime entirely from horror, and I must therefore turn to my notes of what proved to be a strange and peculiarly terrible chain of events. It was a blazing hot day in August. Baker Street lay like an oven beneath the sun, the glare from the yellow brickwork across the road painful to the eye. Our blinds were half drawn, and Holmes lay curled upon the sofa, reading and rereading a letter which had arrived by the morning post. For myself, my service in India had taught me to endure heat with patience. The thermometer stood at 90, and I was not uncomfortable. Holmes, however, remained absorbed, silent, detached, his mind clearly at work elsewhere. "You are right, Watson," he said suddenly. "It does seem a most preposterous way of settling a dispute." I stared at him in blank amazement. "Holmes," I cried, "this is beyond anything I could have imagined." He laughed softly, delighted by my confusion, and proceeded, step by step, to retrace the silent chain of thoughts by which he had followed my unspoken reverie. It was a small demonstration, performed lightly, yet it left me as astonished as ever. "But I have something here," he added, "which may prove more difficult than my little experiment in thought-reading. Have you observed a paragraph in the paper concerning a packet sent to a Miss Cushing of Croydon?" I had not. Holmes passed me the paper and asked me to read aloud. The paragraph was headed, "A Gruesome Packet." It described how a small cardboard box filled with coarse salt had been delivered to Miss Susan Cushing, and how, upon opening it, she had found 2 human ears, freshly severed. The police suspected a practical joke by former lodgers, medical students. The parcel had been posted from Belfast. Lestrade was in charge. "So much for the newspaper," said Holmes. "Now for Lestrade." He read aloud a note from our friend at Scotland Yard, inviting us to Croydon. Holmes turned to me with animation. "What say you, Watson? Can you rise superior to the heat?" I was longing for something to do. We travelled to Croydon that afternoon. Lestrade met us at the station and led us to Cross Street, a long prim row of 2-story houses. Miss Cushing received us quietly. She was a gentle-faced woman of 50, placid and bewildered, distressed by the unwanted attention. The box, she insisted, must be taken away. It lay in the garden shed. Holmes examined it carefully. The tarred string, the knot, the brown paper wrapper, the smell of coffee, the crude handwriting, the rough commercial salt. Finally, he examined the ears. They were not a pair. "This is no practical joke," he said gravely. The ears were fresh, cut with a blunt instrument, preserved not with spirits but with salt. One was small, pierced, feminine, the other sunburned, coarse, masculine. "A double murder," Holmes concluded quietly. Lestrade objected. "Why send such proof to an innocent woman?" "That," Holmes replied, "is the problem." Back inside the house, Holmes questioned Miss Cushing gently. She spoke of her 2 sisters, Sarah and Mary. Mary had married a Liverpool ship's steward, James Browner. Sarah had once lived with them, but had quarrelled bitterly and returned to Croydon. Since then there had been silence. Holmes listened intently. At one moment he paused and stared fixedly at Miss Cushing's ear. I saw surprise and satisfaction flicker across his face. We drove at once to Wallington, where Sarah Cushing lived. She was gravely ill. Brain fever, brought on, the doctor said, by shock. Holmes needed only to see her door. "I have all I want," he said. Later, over lunch, Holmes sent a telegram. By evening, at the police station, he received the reply. "I have found out everything," he told Lestrade, and handed him a name. That night, back in Baker Street, Holmes explained the chain of reasoning. The sailor's knot, the tarred string, the pierced male ear, the Belfast postmark, the resemblance between the female ear in the box and Miss Cushing's own. The packet had not been meant for her, but for her sister, Sarah. James Browner, the steward, had been violent, jealous, and given to drink. His wife Mary had been murdered along with another man. Browner, fleeing by sea, had posted the box as a message of vengeance to the woman he blamed. 2 days later, Lestrade arrested him aboard the Mayday. Holmes read aloud Browner's confession. It was a terrible document. Jealousy, drink, obsession, and rage. A husband driven mad by suspicion. A sister consumed by hatred. A lover struck down. A wife murdered beside him, on the water, in the haze. Browner had killed them both, sunk their bodies, and sent the ears as a savage sign of what meddling had wrought. When Holmes finished reading, he laid the papers down and sat for a long time in silence. "What is the meaning of it, Watson?" he said at last. "What end is served by this circle of misery and violence and fear?" There was no answer, only the great standing problem of human suffering, still unsolved. You've been listening to The Retold Files. Until next time,